This is an oral history recording with Betty Drees Johnson. The interviewer is Betty Brady, who is a friend of Betty Johnson's, longtime friend from our long association at Stetson University. I'm also a volunteer with the West Volusia Historical Society. Today is September 11th, 2023, and the interview is being recorded at the Historical Society's Conrad Research Center. Betty, you were director of the Stetson University duPont-Ball Library for 10 years, from 2001 until you retired in 2011. Yeah. But you worked in Stetson's library for more than 50 years, beginning as a student assistant in the 1950s, and I understand 35 cents an hour.
That's right. And I was glad to get it.
Glad to get it, okay. Times were different. How did you get to Florida? Did you grow up here?
No, I was born in Ohio, in Sydney, Ohio. And my dad's family and mom's family all lived up in that same area. So there were lots of cousins and uncles and aunts and that kind of thing. But after the war, after World War II, my dad got the travel bug, I think. So in 1948, he and Mom sold their house, bought a house trailer, and a new Nash. And that poor little Nash had to pull that house trailer all the way down to Florida.
I remember a Nash Rambler. Was that it?
Yeah, well, it wasn't the Rambler, but it was a Nash, same
right.
company. And so Dad made an adventure out of it for me and my younger brother. And so we did sightseeing along the way. We took about 10 days getting down to Florida. And I'm not sure how he picked up on Daytona Beach, but we stopped in Holly Hill, which is just north of Daytona, and at the North Star Trailer Park. And he heard that we could drive on the beach. And so we went to Sears Roebuck, which was downtown at the time on Beach Street, and got swimsuits for all four of us. And we went to the beach and drove on the beach and went in the ocean. And so we went back to the trailer park, back to our trailer, and Dad bought the Sunday paper on Sunday and looked for work. And he found a job at Dowdy's Bakery on 2nd Avenue. And he was a good baker. He was a craft baker who did the old type of baking, you know, one-man shop type of thing. And so he was hired by Mr. Dowdy. And so he took the job and began looking for a house. And we found a house in Holly Hill that was owned by a couple who wanted to travel. So we used the house trailer as a down payment for that house. Oh, yeah.
That's amazing.
My dad was very canny. And
no, it was meant to be.
It was meant to be. So we took care of getting rid of the house trailer in one fell swoop and got a 3-bedroom house.
In Holly Hill?
On Canal Road, yeah, out in the country. It's now Nova Road.
Nova Road was out in the country?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's now the truck route, of course, too.
Yeah.
But so it was idyllic country life in a way.
How old were you?
I was 9 when we came down,
okay.
yeah. And so they enrolled us at Holly Hill Schools, elementary school. And I was very pleased with those schools. We had the school bus that would take us in because it was more than 2 miles. And so we rode the school bus. And then we lived there for about 3 years. And we went back to Ohio to visit. Well, grandparents were there, my grandparents and others. So went back to visit. And Dad went to see the Mr. Sexauer, that man that he had worked for before, and Mr. Sexauer offered him a job if he would come back to Sydney. So we went back.
Did you sell the house?
We sold the house and went back to Sydney. And we stayed there 1 year. It was 1950, and Korean War broke out. So we only rented a house at that point near my Aunt Marthy. And I was in 7th grade then, and going to junior high school in Sydney. But I had colds the entire winter. So I think my dad got tired of my coughing all the time.
Did it snow?
Oh, it snowed, believe me, it snowed. We didn't have a garage, and he had to scrape snow off his car every morning to go to work.
So you came back.
So we came back, and this time we rented a house near the Catholic Church in Daytona, a big old house, which was a great location. I could catch the bus to the beach and go to the beach when I wanted to.
Did you go to the beach by yourself?
Well, usually with a friend from
Friends.
next door, a
Okay.
girlfriend from
All
next
right.
door.
All right.
But it was a convenient way to get there and back. And we didn't have to depend on a parent to take us.
And so you went to probably Mainland High School?
Mainland High School,
Okay.
yeah. Mainland was a great school, still is, I think.
It
But
was
it was
the old
downtown
Mainland,
then, yeah.
The old Mainland
Yeah,
High School.
downtown and on Bay Street. And I had no hopes of ever getting to college because my dad as a baker wasn't making that kind of money. And but I loved learning, I loved reading. And so I kept on with those courses, on the college prep courses. And we all had to take a test in those days, as they do today, but for different purpose. And those test scores were made available to colleges who wanted to find students had good records. And so I got an invitation from Stetson University to come and try out, to take another test, to try out for one of their full tuition scholarships.
A full tuition
Full
scholarship?
tuition, yeah.
Wow.
Which at that time was $200 a semester.
Still.
Still, at that time it was past what we could have afforded.
Correct.
And there was no way I could make it over there. It was on a Saturday morning, and my dad worked Friday night through Saturday at noon as a baker. And there was no way I was going to get to DeLand. And I talked to my English teacher, Mary Ann Gatch, about it. And so she arranged for a girl with her own car, would you believe, in high school as a senior, Judy Judge. Her father was a judge. And arranged for Judy to go to take me over, and another girl would go with us, and they would work on their senior papers in the library at Stetson while I did my exam up for a couple of hours in Elizabeth Hall. And so that worked out. And then
Were there a lot of people taking the
there
test?
were maybe 70 or 80.
Really?
It was one of the big classrooms in
Wow.
3rd floor Elizabeth Hall.
Okay. You had a lot of competition.
Yeah. But then one morning I was sleeping late as usual on Saturday morning, and the assistant admissions director at Stetson, Far Tuttle, came to our front door, and Mom answered the door, and he had papers with him for me to, and he said that I had won one of those scholarships.
Wow.
And they had papers I had to fill out to be admitted to Stetson University.
You didn't really have to apply.
I didn't
You just-
really have to apply, but I had to
That's-
fill out the
How
paperwork.
merciful. That's so
Yeah.
different from what it's like now.
You bet it was. But it was, and he was very nice. And so we filled out the papers, and Mom and Dad signed them. so that fall I came to Stetson, and Mom and Dad brought me over and dropped me at Stetson Hall, which is no longer on campus, of course. It was torn down several years ago. And Dad told me afterward that when it was in a great room. It was a nice big room with tall ceilings.
It was an old building, yeah.
Yeah, and the rooms were suites. There were 2 girls separated by a bathroom, and then 2 other girls in the next bedroom over. So it was very nice, not a bathroom down the hall, you know. To me, this was first class living for a dormitory. Yep. And the Dad told me later that Mom cried all the way home because she thought the building was a fire trap. And of course, she was right.
She probably was.
I think she was.
Later, it got torn down.
But he told her, well, remember, her room is close to the fire escape. Dad was always looking on the bright side of things. But we never had to use it except for all those middle of the night fire drills that they put us through.
Well, it's
but
good
anyhow, I came to Stetson in 1955.
Okay.
And it was a great 4 years.
What did you study?
History.
History. Had you always been interested in history?
Oh, yeah.
Always.
And my dad had been interested in history, too. He had a Catholic education.
Okay.
His parents were Catholic, so they sent all their kids to the Catholic school. And, of course, that was strong on history, European history primarily. But Dad was always interested in it.
That's when you worked in the library. You were working in the library as a student worker.
Student assistant,
Okay.
yeah. I actually had a job that summer. I got a job for the summer working at a kindergarten and play school. Mrs. Pitts had a kindergarten that operated as a school. She was a certified public teacher during the year, during the academic year. But in the summer, she had those kids again, plus other kids whose parents worked and mothers worked and needed a place for their kids to spend the summer. But she wanted some time off for herself. So another girl and I worked down there, taking care of the kids, doing some moderate teaching.
Land, or?
It was in Daytona Beach,
Daytona.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And it was, in fact, I worked there for 3 summers, plus Christmas and Thanksgiving vacations, because she'd let me come back. And
so you worked your way through.
I worked my way through, yeah.
Right.
And I wanted some more money, and I was able to save up in those jobs, in that job. And I applied for a job. Actually, I applied for a job with the dean of the music school, Dean Allman, and he turned me down because I didn't know, I couldn't do stenography. I had no shorthand skills. And, so then I applied for the library. This was before you had student aid.
Right.
It was all coming out of the employment office at Stetson.
Okay, so you were actually a library employee,
Yeah.
not a student, particularly a student employee. And then eventually, I believe you met your husband.
Yeah.
Along the way.
My sophomore year, I took American history since the Civil War, and that was his field, recent Southern history, recent U.S. And
Evans Johnson.
Evans Johnson, a bachelor, cute as he could be, crew cut, wore these blue cord suits that were popular at the time, and always dressed to the nines, you know, with those blue cord suits and a tie.
A gentleman
no air
from
conditioning.
Alabama, if I remember.
Yeah, he was from Alabama. But he did not call it war between the states. He called it the Civil War.
He was a historian.
He was a historian and a realist.
Yeah.
But he, and then my senior year, I took several courses from him over the years, next couple of years. And then my senior year, he asked me if I would become his student grader to grade book reports and exams. And I told him, I said, well, I'm due to get 40 cents an hour at the library now. And I asked how much the job paid, and he said, I think it's 35, still, 35 cents an hour. So, and I said, well, I really can't afford to take your job. So he talked to Dean McInerney, who oversaw all of this. And Dean McInerney managed, based on my experience in the library and research, to get me 40 cents an hour as his grader.
Okay.
And I think he had something in mind before that too, because Christmas, the Wednesday before Christmas, before Thanksgiving, just as we were all about to head home for the holiday, he cornered me in a classroom in Elizabeth Hall and asked if I would go out with him.
Go out with him?
On Saturday night to dinner and a movie.
Okay.
Because he knew I lived in Daytona, so he could drive over. And of course I agreed. I and every other girl on campus had a crush on him, I think. So that was our first date, and we were married at the end of January.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, we both liked each other.
I suppose he met your parents.
Oh yeah, he met my parents when he came and picked me up that Saturday afternoon, yeah. And Mom really liked him because he was such a gentleman, of course, that Southern gentleman.
Did he take you to Alabama?
Well, yeah. He told me afterward that he had talked to Dr. Lycan, the chairman of the department, and told him that he was going out with me, and that if things worked out, he was going to take me to Alabama to meet his family, and then he was going to propose. And Dr. Lycan told him in this gruff West Virginia voice, Evans, don't you do that. Don't you do that. If you want to marry this girl, if you want to marry Betty, you propose before you take her up there. Don't let her think that it depends on whether they like you or not, whether they like her or not. So he did. He proposed to me there. He apologized for not having enough money to buy a good ring, engagement ring, and I told him I'd rather have a washing machine instead.
You're a very practical person.
I am such a practical person. I got that from my mother, I think. But so we went to Alabama, already engaged.
Okay.
Had a good visit. I liked his family.
And that was at Christmas time?
That was at Christmas time, and they liked me, apparently. And so we actually went down to the jewelry store up there in Alabama, and in Langdale, Alabama, and bought ordered the wedding invitations. We got a date set with the priest at St. Barnabas and ordered the invitations. And
you did not waste any time.
Didn't not waste any time. And we just had a few days between fall and spring semesters, which began at the end of January and beginning of February in those days.
Okay.
And so we were married at the end of, I think it was January 28th or 27th in 1959.
And then you finished your senior year.
I finished my senior year, which was interning. I interned in history classes at Seabreeze High School in Daytona Beach.
Okay. So you weren't actually working in the department?
No, I wasn't working in the history department then. But he had to find a new grader. But his father had been told he had to stop driving in his 80s. So they brought down his car so that we would have a second car.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. And so I only had a learner's permit at the time. And so Evans arranged for a male student who was going to be interning at Seabreeze as well to drive over with me every day. And he can't remember his name now, but his wife would drop him off at our house every morning, and he would drive the car over or I would drive it because I had a licensed driver with me.
Right.
And so we managed to make that work all semester. And I interned, but then I never did teach after that because the director of the library met Evans on campus and I said, Evans, my acquisitions librarian is leaving. Do you think Betty would like to take that on? And Evans said, well, I'd have to ask her, but I think she would. And he was right, of course, and because I loved working in the library. And he said there's one stipulation, though. She would have to begin working on her library degree, preferably this summer, so that she could begin working toward the master's in library service. Evans came home and talked with me about it, and of course I loved the idea, and began looking up library schools where I could get a master's degree. And there was one in Tallahassee, but that didn't interest either one of us. One at Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, which he would have loved because he went to Carolina for his PhD, and he loved Chapel Hill, the town. But their letter accepting me when I did apply to them, the letter was full of typos and grammatical errors. Apparently they gave it to some student to respond in a standard letter or some sort. And he was not impressed, nor was I. But Columbia University accepted me and they furthermore were willing to take 6 hours of my master's in history from Stetson.
You had, in the meantime, gotten a master's in history. Okay.
So in 1961, we headed to New York City. He arranged to get a faculty apartment sublet, and we had a great apartment.
Was that just for the summer?
For the summer, yeah. Just 2 blocks from campus at Columbia. And it was great living in New York, I can't tell you. We spent weekends at the museums, and we did theater and all kinds of good stuff. But
did Evans know New York?
He had been there at various times
Okay.
from his days in the Army.
Yeah.
But it was all an wonderful new experience for me. I was a small town girl from Daytona Beach, really.
Yeah.
But so I finished the degree in 4 summers and came back. And
when you were working, working in the library at Stetson, you were working in the old library.
yeah,
It was one of the Carnegie libraries.
Sampson, yeah,
and
Sampson
now
Carnegie.
Sampson Hall, yeah. What changes have you seen in the field during those years?
That's the thing that I enjoyed so much about being a librarian, is that it changed around me. I didn't have to look for a new career when I got bored.
Because bored.
I was never bored. When I became a librarian, electric typewriters were a brand new thing.
High tech.
High tech, and Xerox machines, wow.
Okay.
We had one Xerox machine in Sampson Library, and it was kept in the secretary's office, and she would run copies if you needed them for you at 10 cents a copy, and it wasn't even torn up. Yeah. But so we went from that, electric typewriters being high tech and Xerox machines, to automation, putting our catalog online, instead of using readers' indexes, readers' guide indexes, to using databases that you accessed online. It's a whole new world for information searching. Mm-hmm. Very exciting, lots of new things to learn all the time.
All the time.
And it's just a wonderful field to be in.
So you loved learning the new things, but you were also a devotee of history always.
Oh, yeah.
you and Evans, I know, were early members of the West Volusia Historical Society and worked on local history.
Yeah. He was very, what's the word I want? Protective of local history.
Really?
And very much in favor of pushing local history.
Did he work with Bill Dreggers?
He did somewhat. Yeah, he did advising really with Bill. And one of Evan's students, Steve Hess, had become a local banker. And Steve had gotten the history bug while he was one of Evan's students. And Steve was working with Bill Dreggers and getting the Historical Society set up here.
Okay.
And I remember Evan said, "They'll never make that go. They'll never make that go."
And now 50 years later, we're
50
still
years
going.
later. But he advised them on the first book that they put out.
Okay.
Volusia, the West Side, I think it was.
And I think I'm sure because I looked it up, he also edited the pictorial history and wrote a wonderful introduction to that. It is so succinct. It captures in just a few pages the early history of the county.
Thank you. That sounds like Evans,
a
too,
real
doesn't it?
real historian.
Yeah, a real historian.
Bill Dreggers was kind of a folk historian.
Bill Dreggers was a wonderful folk historian, completely self-taught. I don't know that he ever even got a college degree, but he loved history. He had been an electrical lineman for the power company, and he just fell in love with local history.
And he'd grown up here. His family, he went way back.
Oh, he went way back.
Yeah.
And he used to do a lot of presentations as Henry DeLand. He would put on the clothes, and he grew the beard, I think, for this purpose. And he could actually look like Henry DeLand when he did that. And would go around and make presentations around the county, especially the western side.
Yeah.
And he and Steve wrangled Evans into doing some of those presentations, not in character, but using slideshows.
Really? I didn't know that.
Local homes that went back to that period of the late 19th century, and talking about the local homes and the local families that had lived in them. And so I remember we would rush through an early supper when I got home from work so he could get his slideshow together and head out to Lake Helen or wherever it was that he was scheduled to make his presentation.
He was much more involved than I really knew.
He was in those early days.
Why do you suppose he thought that local history was so important? I mean, he's doing U.S. history.
Well, there is no history if you don't do the local history first.
Okay.
And it's out of local history that the big things build and develop. And even if it remains a little pocket of history, it's still sitting out there, and it's an important limb or an important part of Florida history, for example. It's an important part of Southern history. Everything depends on these local histories being put together, because without the local histories and genealogies, you don't really have anything to build on.
The bones.
The bones, that's a good way to put it.
Okay. That's really interesting. Well, from what you know of what we're doing now, is there anything that we're missing as a society?
I think the society has been doing an amazing job. He was also very surprised at what you were able to accomplish. And that's before well, he was still living when this research center was built.
The Conrad Center.
And it was he was really so pleased with it because it showed the seriousness of the people behind the society. And he really did enjoy meeting with Bill Dreggers and Steve Hess and the others who took it seriously, because Bill Dreggers was as serious as he could be.
Oh, yeah. And everybody loved him.
Oh, yeah.
He could go say, go to the Kiwanis and say, I need $500, and they'd just fork it over. He was good.
Well, that's one reason he was so successful
Yeah.
with the History Society.
But, back to the library, you were pretty good at fundraising too. After you became director in 2001, I know that you started some fundraising efforts, and you wound up raising a couple $1 million.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Desperation. Because when I became director, this was 2001, remember, so it was just a few months after the 9/11.
Right.
And everything sort of stopped at that point in terms of donations, and a lot of things sort of stopped at that point, I think. But the thing that we found at the library was that they also did some examination of the computer systems that they were using for accounting at the library, at the university, and redid some of the budgets. And one of the things they redid was to cut my materials budget, that is for books and periodicals, by 17.5%.
Wow.
And it was a lean budget to begin with, but 17.5% off of it was rough. So first thing we did was cut subscriptions to magazines and journals. And I've got the faculty to cooperate with me on helping do that. But the next thing I started doing was raising money. We set up a group called the Library Associates, who would pay $35 a year to become a library associate. This would entitle them to 2 receptions a year.
So you were doing outreach into the community.
Oh, outreach into the community, outreach into everybody that we could get hold of. And, but we did have a number of townspeople come in as library associates, because it also gave them access to the library. They could come in and use our computers, they could use our reference materials, and if they were library associates at the next level of $100, they could actually check out books.
Ah.
So we got a few of those too.
I'm sure.
But it was a good outreach with townspeople, and it worked very well, and we were able to use the money to buy more materials, buy more books and periodicals and journals. So, and surprisingly, a number of those associates became donors otherwise, because they liked the library, they liked coming in, they liked seeing the students working and studying. And
I remember those receptions. You used to have the new faculty so
Yeah.
people could meet them,
Yeah.
and that was a good thing.
Well, we invited all the faculty, but we honored the new faculty that year, and then we added on to that honoring faculty who had published books that year.
Oh.
And sometimes this was the only recognition they got on campus among their colleagues, and certainly among the public, our townspeople that were part of our associates group. And so it was always very popular. And the fall reception has continued because of that. And the president would come, and he loved it. And she loved it later when it was Wendy.
When we had a new president.
Yeah. But it was good. And I actually got permission that we could serve wine at these receptions.
Oh.
Yeah. And we
That's
had to buy
always
the
good.
wine ourselves, of course, at the library. And they had to serve it. The people who worked in the cafeteria had to
Employees.
come and serve it.
Employees, yeah.
But we never had anyone go out of line. I don't think the servings were all that big.
People know to be good in the library.
Oh, yeah.
Librarians train you. Another thing that you were able to do somehow is keep in touch with alumni?
Yeah.
Because I know you got 2 big alumni donations.
Yeah. Our first big one was from Daphne Brownell, who was a local genealogist. And she had used the library a great deal and had even worked in our archives, researched in our archives. And she worked for the university for a brief time. I think it may have been in the admissions office or the registrar, I'm not sure which, but it was just a brief time. But Daphne was very into local genealogy. She did studies of the local cemeteries and the people who were buried there, and actually made lists and sent them on to Washington.
More history.
More history. And so Daphne moved from here to Jacksonville, to a retirement community up in Jacksonville. And she left us, I think it was $330,000.
Oh my gosh.
As an endowment.
Wow.
Yeah, that was very nice, indeed. And I remember talking with her on the phone about it. And I remember when she told me how much it was, I said, oh, that's enough for an endowment. And she said, well, I would think so. Daphne brooked no fools. So we set it up as an endowment, which brought in, I think, $20,000 or $30,000 a year for us to use for books.
That's great. And then Clay Shaw, who was an alumnus, excuse me, gave a major research collection. He had been 13 years in Congress, and he gave you.
Clay he had not been one of Evan's students, but he'd been a business school major. But he was swept out in one of those years in which virtually every Republican got knocked out and their jobs were taken over by Democrats. But that meant that they had to be out of their offices, completely emptied out in a period of 2 weeks, which gave them no time to consider much of anything. So he needed a place for all of that stuff to go. He had people packing up stuff up there already in his office, but they needed a place for the truck to leave it when it left Washington. And I worked with IT, to get the automation people, to get them to give up a study room that they were using down in the basement of the library. It was right next to the archives office. Got them to give up that room that they had been using for classes. And so we set up that room to hold the Clay Shaw collection. And it went beyond that, of course, into other space down in the basement. But Clay was just so pleased to have some place for his collection to go.
And it's a wonderful resource for students.
Oh, it is, and it's still being used widely by numbers of students because Clay was involved in various welfare bills that went through Congress. And so you had all of all the research that his staff had done on those. Right. And it was a great resource. And then Max Cleland, of course. Max had been one of Evan's students. As Max used to say, he was one of Evan's C students, but he enjoyed the classes very much.
But eventually he got into the Senate.
Yeah. He went into Vietnam. He was one of those young men that was sent to Vietnam with an ROTC commission. And he was injured with a fallen grenade and lost both legs at the knee and one arm right about the elbow. And Max was an amazingly strong man. And he came back, because he never would have lived in a different era, but he came back and went to Walter Reed, and they did a wonderful job rehabilitating him, giving him artificial limbs and even another artificial arm, which I don't know that he ever used. I never saw him use it. But he, Max maintained his sense of humor somehow. And he wrote a book called Strong in the Broken Places.
I've read it. It's wonderful.
It is wonderful, and it is inspiring. And he asked if we'd be interested in his things, not just from his, as he came back, went through all the rehab, and then went back to Georgia where his home was. And he was elected to the Senate from Georgia. He loved politics. And, but he lost his Senate campaign. Dirty, dirty politics. But he lost the campaign. And again, he had to change out his office, move out of his office. And he also had a lot of stuff from his home where his mother had kept everything he'd ever written or done. And
there was Vietnam memorabilia too.
Yeah. So Max let us set up the Cleveland room, and Wayne Bailey managed to get it named for him, the Cleveland room. But it's an amazing collection. It includes the tapes that he used to send back from Vietnam, and you could hear him talking to his parents about what he had been doing that day, and you could hear shelling in the background.
Oh my goodness, imagine as a mother getting that tape.
But at least when she got the tape, she knew he was alive, at least when he sent the tape.
True.
And his parents were very, very supportive of him.
Wow.
As long as they lived.
Wow.
And yeah, they had to have been heartbroken by the damage done to that poor man. But it's a number of those items have actually been put on the website for Max Cleland's home. And Sue Ryan, who's just retired as dean of the library, was responsible for a lot of the work with Max's materials. Yeah.
She was your assistant.
She was an associate librarian.
Associate librarian under you, and then when you left, she wound up eventually taking over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I recommended her most highly when I retired because Sue was full of ideas, and some of which I think I probably took credit for.
That's what a boss does.
That's what a boss does, right?
But she was into the the electronic part too.
Yeah, she was one of the earliest adapters for the electronics.
Which is where libraries have gone.
Yeah. So she was a big help to me when I wrote the RFP, the request for proposal, for a database provider for our catalog to replace the old card catalog. And so I wrote that for an integrated system which would take care of circulation, the cataloging, the entire bibliography of our holdings. And so she was on my committee to help choose the vendor that we selected. And it's we're still using that same vendor. It was a good choice, although it's changed considerably over the years.
And books are less important now, I suppose.
Well, not really.
Not really, okay.
Because a book is still a way to put into words and into one place a lot of information about a specific topic, instead of having it scattered throughout one journal and then another journal and then another journal, and some you may not have access to, some you may. It's, but a book puts everything together. Monograph is what it's called, is a monograph, because it's one graph.
Right. One thing.
So books are still very useful, and they still get a lot of circulation at Stetson.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Because I love books.
I know you do, Betty.
Well, after you retired, you served on Stetson's Board of Trustees.
Yes.
So you were busy with that. And you also created an endowment for the library. Earlier, you and Evans had set up endowed scholarship funds for students, but this was for the library that you did. And you served as president of the DeLand Museum of Art and wound up donating matching funds for a children's art center.
Yeah.
This is an interesting use of funds.
Well, the university, the arts, DeLand
museum.
Museum of Art had the new building, the Cultural Arts Center, which is right on the boulevard. And then a woman who owned a little house behind there in an enclave in their parking lot, in fact, had died, and her house was for sale. So the museum contacted me because they were looking for a matching fund to go with the ECHO grant from County of Volusia, which had ECHO grants for arts projects and environmental projects and this sort of thing. They still have that grant in the county. But you had to have matching funds. So I agreed to match the $200,000 that they were putting up at the time. And so we bought the property and redid it. That is, the museum bought the property and redid it so that it could serve as a children's arts center and projects for children. Evans was very interested in art and for children's art. His mother had been a very good amateur artist, but she had studied art. And he said he tried it as a child and was bombed completely, not a good artist at all. But he did learn to appreciate art. So this was one way to carry that forward, was to have a...
Well, and he was interested in children. You know, a lot of those things that he and Bill Dreggers did were for children, taking history to the kids.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. And you have been on our Historical Society board for a long time, and recently gave us a nice matching grant too, which was wonderful, to spur our fundraising efforts. As you think back on all of that, what advice would you give to young people today? Anything?
Recognize the beauty that you see around you, and recognize the history that you see around you. Because DeLand, for example, is full of a rich history. And even if you drive out to the St. Johns River, you can just see in your mind what it must have been like in the days of the carriages, with people driving out there, or go out to the railroad depot. And that was way out of town. But it used to be right in the middle of DeLand. So try to think about what that meant when people could take the train down from New York City and come to DeLand for the winter. And it must have looked like heaven to be in a land without snow.
A land without snow, but very much a frontier in those days.
Very much a frontier.
Very much a frontier.
But still, DeLand had some nice old hotels at the time.
Yeah.
And Stetson itself, of course, has a rich history.
Indeed.
And some of the buildings are still here from that period and still being used and lived in.
Correct. And they are actually celebrating it too.
Yeah.
They're celebrating, I think it's the 140th year.
I think it's the 40th, yeah.
150th. So I think you've spent your life a lot with history and a lot with information, helping people find the right answers. And
Hopefully.
yeah, so.
Well, as I think I told you, I had a student assistant once who was in Evan's class, and she came back and she was sort of embarrassed because she said that Evans had pointed her out and said that she worked in the library. And he said, I want to tell you young men, if you think you're going to go to graduate school, marry a librarian because they know how to find everything. They may not know it, but they can find it for you.
They know how to do it. Yeah, well, that reminds me of a quote that I recently saw. It said, Google can bring you back 100,000 answers, but a librarian can bring you back the right one. So on that note, let's close.
I like your quotation book.
Thank you so much, Betty.